The dust rose in heavy clouds above the town square, the kind of suffocating haze that clung to the lungs and carried the smell of sweat, horses, and despair, and at the very heart of it stood the rough-hewn stage where women were lined up like cattle, their eyes vacant, their wrists bound, while men of every kind, ranchers with coin to spare, gamblers still stinking of whiskey, drifters whose eyes searched for possession more than companionship, stood in the dirt below, their pockets jingling, their voices sharp with bidding, and Clara Belle, thin as a rail from weeks without decent food, her dress torn at the hem, stood at the far end of that line with her chin trembling, but her eyes fixed stubbornly on the horizon, because she swore she wouldn't cry, wouldn't let them see her break, though her hands trembled as the auctioneer barked prices like he was hawking mules instead of human souls, each number another lash against her dignity, until her turn came, and the sun seemed to burn hotter on her back, and the crowd leaned forward to get a better look, some laughing, some whispering crude promises, some calculating whether she was worth a roof and a bed, and Clara wanted to vanish into the boards beneath her feet, but she held her head high even as her voice inside whispered that she was nothing, that no one would see her as anything more than a trade, and just as the auctioneer slapped the side of the block and shouted, "Who'll start me at 50 cents for the girl?" a silence rolled through the men, broken by sneers and a few half-hearted bids, until one voice rose clear and steady above them all, not loud, not boastful, just certain, a voice that carried like a promise, "She'll walk away with me." And when Clara's eyes lifted, she saw him, a cowboy standing at the edge of the crowd, tall in the saddle of a chestnut horse, his hat tipped low, his face shadowed by dust and sun, but his eyes clear as river water were fixed not on her body, but on her, the person, the soul. And it made her knees weak in a way hunger never had, because for the first time since her father's death she felt seen, not weighed or priced, and though the auctioneer stammered, tried to wring more coin out of the others, no one else dared raise a hand against that cowboy's claim, not because they couldn't, but because something in his presence told them the matter was settled. And before Clara could understand what had just happened, the man dismounted, strode forward, pressed a silver dollar into the auctioneer's greasy palm, and then climbed the steps to the block, where he cut the rope from her wrists with a single flick of his knife, his voice low but steady as he leaned close and said, "You're free now. Miss, walk with me." And though her legs trembled, Clara followed him down those steps, through the sea of staring eyes, and into the blinding light of the street, each step feeling less like shame and more like salvation, though she could not yet fathom why this stranger had chosen her, nor what fate waited beyond that dusty square, only that for the first time in too long, she wasn't walking alone. The sound of Clara's boots on the dirt street felt strange to her, almost foreign, because for so long she had only known the weight of chains or the drag of bare feet across splintered wood. But now each step echoed with a freedom she hadn't yet learned how to carry, and beside her walked the cowboy who had bought her, not with the lustful hunger of the men who had circled her like vultures, but with a calm steadiness that seemed to push back the jeers of the crowd, his silence saying more than any words could, his shadow long and unbending in the evening sun. And Clara tried to glance at him without being seen, studying the square jaw dusted with stubble, the firm set of his mouth, the way his hand rested near his holstered revolver, not with the twitch of violence, but with the ease of a man who had lived too long in places where danger rode closer than friends. And she wondered why, out of all the women, out of all the choices, he had lifted his hand for her, and that thought alone made her chest tighten with a confusion of fear and gratitude, because she knew in the West kindness was often just another mask for cruelty. Yet when he stopped at the hitching post and offered his calloused hand to help her mount his horse, there was no demand in his touch, only an invitation, and Clara, though trembling, took it, letting him lift her into the saddle before swinging up behind her, his arm settling lightly at her side, his voice low as the words brushed her ear. "Hold on now, it's a rough trail from here," and with that the horse surged forward, carrying them out of the town that had been her prison, into the rolling openness of the prairie where the horizon seemed endless, and the farther they rode, the more Clara felt the air loosen in her lungs, though still she clutched the front of her dress as though it might protect her from the unknown that lay ahead. And for miles neither of them spoke. The only sound the steady rhythm of hooves and the lonely cry of a hawk circling above. Until at last Clara's voice broke the silence, fragile as glass. "Why me? Out of all of them, why did you choose me?" And the cowboy did not answer right away, his eyes fixed on the line of distant hills. But finally he said in a tone so even it felt carved from stone, "Because they looked at you like a price, and I looked at you like a person." And though Clara wanted to believe, her heart had been broken too many times to trust so quickly. So she said nothing, only held his words in the corner of her mind like a seed waiting to see if it might grow. And as the sky burned with the pinks and golds of sunset, they reached a small cabin nestled against the edge of a grove, weathered but sturdy, with smoke still curling from the chimney. And the cowboy swung down, tied his horse, and reached up to help her again, his touch steady, his voice softer this time. "You'll be safe here," but the word safe made Clara's chest ache, because it was a word she had long stopped believing in. Yet when he opened the door, and the warmth of the fire spilled out, she stepped inside and found not the trap she feared, but a humble room with a wooden table, a single bed neatly made, and shelves lined with books and tools, the kind of space built by a man who had worked with his hands, who had carved out survival from the land. And though it was plain, it felt more like a home than anywhere she had ever stood. And when the cowboy closed the door behind them and removed his hat, setting it gently on the table, Clara finally saw him in the firelight, the weariness etched into his brow, the scars along his jaw, the sadness buried deep in his eyes, and, though his presence carried strength, there was also a loneliness there that mirrored her own. And for a long moment they simply looked at each other, two souls worn thin by the cruelty of the world, and Clara felt the tears she had been holding back finally break free, her voice trembling as she whispered, "I don't know how to be anything but what they told me I was." And the cowboy stepped closer, not reaching for her, not forcing, just standing near enough that she could feel the steadiness of his breathing, his words slow and deliberate. "Then maybe it's time someone showed you different." And though Clara shook her head, trying to swallow her sobs, he brushed her hair gently back from her face with the back of his knuckle, as if afraid even his touch might break her. And when she flinched, he didn't pull away. He only said, "You don't owe me a thing, not tonight, not ever. I didn't bring you here to own you. I brought you here because no one deserves to be left in the dirt like that." And that truth struck her harder than any cruel hand ever had, because it was the first time in her life a man had spoken without asking for something in return. And the realization made her legs give way until she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her shoulders shaking as she whispered again, "Why me?" And the cowboy knelt beside her, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze steady as he replied, "Because you were still standing when the world wanted you on your knees. That's worth more than any coin." And Clara covered her face with her hands, unable to hold back the storm of emotions inside her. But somewhere in that storm, for the first time in years, flickered the fragile spark of hope, a spark that told her maybe, just maybe, she had walked away from the auction block not as property, but as a woman who might finally begin again, though she could not yet see the dangers lurking in the shadows beyond that cabin, dangers that would soon force both her and the cowboy to reckon with secrets neither of them had spoken, and choices that would bind their lives together in ways neither could escape. For in the Wild West, salvation always came at a price, and theirs was only just beginning. Night settled heavy around the cabin, stars scattered like cold fire across the endless prairie sky. But inside, Clara lay restless on the small bed, her breath shallow, her eyes flicking to the ceiling as if shadows themselves whispered threats. For though the cowboy's words had given her a fragile sense of safety, her heart still throbbed with the memory of chains, and safety was a word that had been stolen from her too many times to trust easily. Yet when she turned her head and saw him by the fire, his broad shoulders bent forward, elbows on his knees as the flames carved his face in gold and shadow, she felt a strange ache, part fear, part longing that she did not know how to name. And the silence stretched so long she finally whispered, "They won't let me go." And the cowboy lifted his gaze to her, his eyes burning steady like coals, and he answered in a tone that carried both certainty and warning, "Then they'll have to go through me first."